Hello and welcome to Current Wave. I'm your host, Ayla Wayman, and in this podcast, we meander through our shared delusions and stumble into ethereal shit-talking as we dive into the waves of the human experience. I'm so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you enjoy the ride. Hello. Welcome to another chat. I'm on the road. I am in one of the most beautiful places in Colorado, up by Telluride. It's incredibly exquisite, and I am deep in my own creative realms. I'm in my own creative genius, which is ideating, which is coming up with ideas and making connections and creating coherent ways of sharing them. And this is something that really comes to me very naturally when I drive, and I'm really excited and grateful for that. So I've been thinking about manifestation and really like what that is, because there's different schools of thought, there's different schools of manifestation. There's actually a lot of different iterations of this subject, and I'm here to talk about some things that I'm seeing in this realm, because manifestation is both something I deeply believe in and something that I think can be broken down into other ways of thinking about it and looking at it. And I've been studying this practice for really the past 20 years in my own life, my own experience, my own creation process. And I'm thinking about these different components because I'm in the middle of a really big personal up level. And what I really want to do as a guide is help people in their personal transformations by breaking down patterns and themes that I've seen and witnessed and been a part of in my own life and the lives of others. So I do that through pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is really important. And it's interesting because I've recently learned and seen that not all people have this. And I think that it's one of the most valuable things that we can have as humans, because it essentially allows us to keep ourselves in loops or grow and succeed in new directions. And so I'm really interested in pattern recognition. I know there's probably a lot of patterns and things that I don't see and are still out of my line of sight. But once I see a pattern and recognize it, I really love to articulate and share it. So much of what I do is recognize patterns and create systems and offerings around the pattern, because patterns in the universe show us consistency and they show us systems of things that work. You know, religion is a pattern, the way plants grow is a pattern. A lot of things are built off of patterns, like life itself, right? An embryo grows in the womb in a very specific way that's consistent across humanity. And so if an embryo always grows in the same way, we can understand the building blocks of creation. And so in my course, I talk a lot about systems of creation. And that's really what I mean, is just recognizing patterns and laying them out piece by piece so that you, me, anyone can build off of patterns that are consistent, which means that they're patterns that work across industries, across life, across experiences. And there's nuance within that, because I also think that each soul has its own arc and journey. And so each person's experience of a pattern is going to be slightly nuanced. and I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. But I'm thinking about manifestation as I'm driving and thinking about the patterns of really like what that is, because I like to challenge the status quo. I really do believe in a certain set of things that happen that have to do with manifestation, and I think there's different pieces of it that all together we're kind of labeling as manifestation, but they can really be broken down into different stages and components. So the first component in my mind is honestly coming to a state of desire and or frustration. So usually that looks like having an idea or a thought or a vision or an inspiration come to you, and then usually actually very quickly, whether we recognize it or not, there's like a equal and opposite resistance that immediately comes into play unless we've done a lot of work to move that resistance so that can kind of not happen. But a lot of us have perhaps different levels of negative associations with desire and creation, especially if we've had a challenge with that process in the past. So we get that inspiration, we get that hit. Maybe we're meditating. This has really happened to me a lot. I'm going to really just use my own experience as an example. When I first really started to do Kundalini yoga consistently, when I was about 24 is really when I implemented a morning practice that was every day and not just going to classes here and there. I started to get this vision of inner tide, of leading women in this particular way and supporting them with their life and their vision. So I started to get this inspiration. And I was 24 years old. I was living in New York City. I was working in the fashion industry. I didn't even know how to get started on guiding women. I had a lot of blocks in my throat chakra, my solar plexus. There was a lot of stagnant energy. I had huge visibility wounds, all sorts of things going on. So I had this initial desire, this initial vision that was given to me through my connection to Source, is what I will say. And then there was all of this stuff around it that I have worked through for the past 10 years in my process of coming into my own power and my own path. So that's like the first step of manifestation, having a desire. And then recognizing our resistance to that desire. And so a lot of the formulas and manifestation processes also recognize that, right? Like, this is a really common practice and tool and thing, and people teach this because this is a pattern. This is something that we can isolate these different parts of it, and we can share them in all of these ways, and we can work with all of the pieces to eventually move our energy in such a way that we're able to change our life. So desire is really that first piece. And then we move into finding the resistance. And another thing, as I'm in this up level, for me at this point, it's really just like recognizing all of the stories I have against this thing and finally getting to the point where I'm ready to overcome them. So I really believe that also our worldview, both our conscious and our unconscious mind, are what are creating our reality, right? Like, really simply, if we think we can, we can, and if we think we can't, we can't. And that is like the biggest block in creation, is whether we think we can or we think we can't. And our limiting beliefs are what limit us, really, truly, very simply, right? Like, we're not going to step out of the confines that we create for ourselves. And ultimately, there are no rules. Life is way more malleable and movable than we could ever imagine. There's so much money in the world. There's so much opportunity in the world. There's so much out there. And us not recognizing that and seeing that is often our biggest problem. And then the other thing that goes with that is our own worth, our own self-worth. And so if we can't see the opportunity, we're not going to move toward it. We're not going to claim it. And if we don't think we're worthy, we're not going to move toward it, and we're not going to claim it. So that's really the first step, is identifying those limiting beliefs, identifying those challenges, identifying that resistance, and then moving with it and moving that energy. And so the biggest tools for moving that are really common are hypnosis and working with the pliability of the subconscious mind, and rewiring those neural pathways, which we know is possible, and there's more and more research on and more information about, and there's different techniques in order to do that. There's a lot of people who have those meditations and those hypnosis things in order to move those pathways and change our perception, because we have to change our perception. Our perception of life is what truly creates reality, and I've seen it time and time again in my own life and the life of others. And it's really magical to have so many people in my world who are several steps in front of me in their lives, their finances, and to watch them create. And so much of that is about believing it's possible. But those are the first steps. Identifying our desires, and then I would say, honestly, claiming our desires, deciding that they are possible for us, and really moving toward them with wholeheartedness and conviction, because that's the only way. We have to believe that's possible, and then we have to move toward that. So then what starts to happen on a really practical level is when we decide that our desires are possible and that we are worthy of them, what really starts to change is our behavior. And I think that action is really the underpinning of all of this, right? It's this step-by-step process. We have to have the inspiration, we have to have the desire, and then we have to decide that we're willing to change the way we are. And usually two things are what I see change that. Either we get so tired and sick of ourselves and our current reality and our current life that we're at our absolute wit's end, we're at a rock bottom, we're absolutely done with what is, and then we change. Or we're so motivated and inspired that we change. Those are, I think, the two forces that really create change. So right now, I feel like I'm really integrating both. I'm in this incredible place where I'm not at a rock bottom. I'm at a rock bottom in some ways, but I'm also not at a rock bottom because I've been so much lower than this. So I would say I'm at a new rock bottom. Also, as you grow, these things don't really change. It's just the stakes change, the situation changes, but you're always going to be up-leveling. You're never going to get it all done. The beautiful part of being a human is we are in a constant state of creation, ultimately. And the finish line is always moving forward. So coming to peace with that is one whole other thing. And then I'm feeling absolutely done with this stage and phase of my life, and I'm completely unwilling to entertain a lot of things that I've entertained up until this point. I'm up-leveling, and I'm just so committed to that, and I would rather have nothing than settle for something that's not right or mediocre or just scraping by. I've done that. I know that experience. I'm over it, and I'm really clear about that. And I feel like I have the fortitude to move away from that because, I've moved forward step by step by step, and, still called in many things, created many things, XYZ. And now my standards are just moving way bigger and way faster. So I'm annoyed with my life enough that I'm done. I'm done with some habits and patterns, and I see them clearly, and I'm like in this portal of really moving away from that. And then the other thing is a lot of tools and resources have recently come into my life that are inspiring the holy heck out of me. Like, I have never been so inspired. So I have this really beautiful bridge of being completely fed up, also really in my worth, because I'm really seeing a lot of people who have way less skill, way less conviction, all of these things. Like, I'm starting to peek into higher levels, and that's making me say, oh no, I can do this too. I know what I'm doing. I have a track record. I have all of this underneath my belt, because one thing I do is think that other people know what they're talking about. And some people really do. There's amazing creators and people in the world who are totally in integrity. And then there's a lot of people who have no idea what they're talking about, but they have the confidence. We see those people succeed all the time. And that's that conviction. That's that believing in ourselves and having high worth. And so I have this really beautiful bridge set up for myself right now that is allowing for an up level and a really big shift. And it's really coming in fast. And it's coming in fast because I've been working on this for so long, and I've had so many up levels, and they just keep going, right? It doesn't end. We just get to new levels, and then we're at the bottom of the next one. And that's the point, and that's okay. And that's a beautiful process. We just work our way through the levels of our own life and self. So what happens when we have this step-by-step process laid out? We have our desire, then we see all of our resistance. Then we get sick of our lives or so inspired that we're willing to change. And then we work on the energetics and the reprogramming, right? And the tools that I use to do that are hypnosis and also Kundalini yoga, because those have been the things that have been most effective for me over the past 10 years of studying tons of methods, working with tons of coaches and teachers, and dipping my toes into so many different things. Those are the things that I like. Those are the things that I see work consistently. Those are the patterns I've recognized and now share and teach in my own work. Then what happens is once we move those energies, it creates space for us to step into a new identity and a new vision of ourselves. And that's mostly happens from up-leveling our worth and up-leveling like what we think is possible, right? So if we have this clarified vision of where we're going and what we're doing and who we are and what we want, and we learn how to piece that out and make that clear and then embody that, what happens is our actions change. And that's what I think creates so much of all of this manifestation thing actually comes through actions. And yes, we have to have all of these pieces and parts. We have to have the vision, we have to have the unblocking and the energetics, and then we have to create this new identity and move from that place and move with action and consistency. And I think what has set me apart, because I have known many friends and people and seen different creators step in and out of this over the years, is, and this is going to sound like such a like raw Tony Robbins kind of like thing, but I actually think it's true, is that you don't lose unless you quit. And I mean that wholeheartedly and kindly and sweetly and all of the things. And I don't even think there's such thing as like losing in life. Our paths are so different and so important and must be honored. And sometimes we're going down the wrong path. Like I think it's a 6'3". So part of my path actually was going in the wrong direction for the first 30 years of my life. And that's a really challenging path and a challenging part of my makeup and my experience. And that's the only thing that's going to really allow me personally to step into my role as a role model. So that's the sixth part of my path. So I have the martyr role model combination, and I am going to be a teacher from raw experience, from all of my mishaps, from like doing the thing myself and fucking up a ton. And that's how I'm going to be able to inspire others, guide others, support others on their path. And so I say that to say, sometimes we are on a path and we need to pivot, and there's a very fine line that we need to learn how to discern. And I think it's also different for each of us of, okay, where do we pivot and not quit? We want to like keep the momentum. It's really about consistency and being in it for the long haul. And that's why I do visionary work. That's why I help people. And our visions are going to change and evolve and pivot and move and all of these things. And that's part of the process and really important and beautiful. But it's about continuing onward and to really be in our stick-to-itiveness, which is something my grandfather always used to say, the will to win and stick-to-itiveness. And not the will to win in a competition way, just the will to really lean into your highest path and iteration in this life. And there's different levels that we're able to get to, and really our commitment is what allows us to move into those new levels. And this is what I love helping people with, honing in on that commitment for themselves, finding the things that motivate them. I guess their why, even though I don't love using that word for some reason, it's never resonated, but finding that thing inside of them that is wanting to come forward above all else, and then building structures around that and supporting that and making that feasible. Because especially in entrepreneurship, it is not for the faint of heart. I don't think. Yeah, and especially in entrepreneurship or creating a path that is different is often not for the faint of heart. Some people also have amazing luck. I have amazing friends who started later than me and have gone forward in ways that blow my mind. And that's why I really come back to, like, there's systems that are consistent and that we can use, and we all have our own path. And so it's really honoring this combination of really who we are and why we're here, which is why that is the tagline that I use consistently all the time. So going back to that identity piece, because when we shift our conscious mind and our unconscious mind, it shifts our identity. And when our identity shifts, our actions shift. And so really creating a new identity is also a part that I sometimes, like, I am also mashing up several different manifestation ways of thinking together, because that's kind of one of the things that I do is I combine systems. I combine things that I think resonate and I pull them all together into one. And so this identity piece I think is really important, and we want to essentially create an identity that is 10 steps in front of the one that we already have. Because moving from an identity that already has the thing allows us to create actions as if we're already living our dream life, and that is what pulls that dream life into being. So it's like this really funny thing, but consistently that's what I see, and being 10 steps in front of ourselves and moving from that place. Like, if your goal is to make $10,000 a month, let's say, I would actually recommend moving from a place as though you're already making $10,000 a month. Like, that's old news. You want to move from an identity that's their goal is to make $50,000 a month. Because if you're moving from that place, you're going to pull in that $10,000 faster and more effectively because you're shooting further ahead. And this is something I don't hear as much. Joe Dispenza sort of works with this, but this is something that I cannot recommend enough. So how are you going to do that? That's one of the things that I teach, is really moving from that place, moving from that 10x place, and then it's just going to get you to that preliminary goal so much more effectively and faster. Because if you're thinking about making $10,000 a month, that's going to be so much harder actually than thinking about making $100,000 a month. It is, and that sounds counterintuitive until you learn that process, and then it makes a lot of sense, and it's actually what helps you move into where you want to be. You have to be 10 steps in front of yourself in order to do that. Because if you're living from a 10x identity, you are going to manufacture 10x actions, and your actions are ultimately what create your reality, and you need the energetics piece as well. So this is the system that we use in Inner Prism. This is the system that we implement, and this is the system that we use to transform your life. And I've really been able to hone in on this and refine this system after going through our first 2 iterations of this program. And so we're really honing in on this in the fall. And this is going to be the methodology that we're really leaning on to create a 10x life, because your 10x life is going to be what gets you to that first step. And it becomes a lot easier when you're working backward from that big, crazy vision. And so I love breaking down this system. I love teaching this system. I love supporting people in this system, because it's like all things. When I lay it out like this, it probably is clicking in your mind. It might be making sense. Maybe it feels a little intimidating or a little crazy, or maybe there's a part of you that's triggered, or maybe there's a part of you that's really inspired. And your next question might be, okay, so how do I actually do that? And that's what I teach. That's what you learn in this program, and I learn by doing this for the past decade and really refining the system and bringing it into being. And it's fun. It's really fun. And then it really does become a game. And the more that we play this as a game, the more we're able to create and lean into this world and allow things to manifest and unravel. And the other thing that I really want to say, so action's the key. It really is. And it's taking consistent action on your vision, on your dreams, and learning from your mistakes, learning from the things that you've tried, and then doing the next thing. And it's about continuously going on that path and creating also a robust nervous system, not only to roll with the punches, because that's super, super important in a 10x life, but to also have the capacity, right? To have the capacity to hold a big vision and then to receive a big vision, because there's a multitude of steps in this. And that's why I've really broken this down. That's why I am continuously also to iterate on this program. Like I have two groups going through it so far. We had the beta launch and now my second group. And I get to hone in more and more and more on what works, what this process really is, and continuously articulate and support you in your 10x life, because that is what brings us into our future. And the last thing I'm going to say and bring it into this realm is our soul's path, because your 10x life is completely different than mine. And I think that we're in a really interesting time where we have so many external examples of what a life can look like. And that can be both very inspiring and very distracting. And so honing in on your own truth is more valuable than ever before. And this is one of the most important pieces to this path. And sometimes I see that neglected, not in all systems of creation, but in some, because your life is your path, and who you are in this iteration of self and soul is specific. It is. Not every single person is meant to have $100,000 months. It's just not how it is. And I know that might be frustrating, but it also might be liberating, because in your own path, you have a beautiful, optimal path that is correct for you. And in that path, you are nourished and taken care of, and your parts of you that are needing to be met in this lifetime are going to be met in this lifetime. And I think I hear so much bypassing of karma and soul in this space, which is really weird, because it's actually, I would say, the most powerful piece. And so to leave that out of the equation and sort of sell like, oh yeah, you can be just as successful as this person. You can be just as successful in your own way. And I just think that saying it in a different way is not true to me at this juncture. I will gladly have my mind changed and open to seeing something different. I just have not seen that or learned that through the lineages that I practice and teach. Karma can be shifted. Karma can be transmuted. And that will definitely open up bigger and bigger possibilities. However, you're not going to be able to transmute karma until you face what's happening in your life. So if you have consistent money blocks, if you have consistent visibility blocks, if you have consistent relationship blocks, I also want to change the word blocks. If you have consistent money resistance, if you have consistent relationship resistance, if you have consistent visibility resistance, guess what? That's your work. That's your path. Your resistance is showing you your work, right? The thing that's keeping you seemingly stuck is exactly the thing that's going to set you free. So it's really easy to identify, especially when you work with a coach or when you work with someone, right? I've worked with many people over the years to see where my resistance is so that I can transmute that energy and move on to the next step and the next level to transmute as much karma as possible in this life, because I want to be more and more and more free, and I want to be positioned in my next life to get to that next level. So I love doing this work. I love teaching this work. And the soul's path is the really important piece, because when you're on your soul's path, it just feels right, even when something goes wrong, quote unquote, wrong. Also, don't believe that. I teeter on the edge of being a non-dualist, so I barely believe in right and wrong. And in that same vein, one of the things that was the hardest for me, that I talk about all the time because it's such a great example for this, is my breakup. And in the moment when I broke up with this person who I loved and thought I was going to marry and spend the rest of my life with, in the conversation and the moment where it was like, we're not doing this, I have never experienced more physical, emotional heartbreak than in that moment. And yet there was a thread that I was aware of even at the time of, this is correct. And I did not like that at all. I was so pissed about that, honestly. I was so broken. I was so annoyed. I was like at my wit's end, and I was really mad at God that was correct, but I knew in every fiber of my being, even though I was in denial, it was both, because these things are often a paradox. I knew in every fiber of my being that it was the correct choice, even though I hated it and didn't want that at the time. And that is the power of our soul's path, is that we might not like it, but it will be correct. And, this is how I think about the heartbreak and the challenge and all of the things that, various people come up against in their lives. Like, people come up against really big challenges. And I really believe that our life is the path, and not to say, I want everyone to be as free of challenge as possible. I want everyone to be as fortified for the things they face as possible. And we are not in control of the things that come to us, right? And so how do we face them with as much ease and grace and resilience and capacity? That's really what can change and transform us really deeply to our core, embodying and knowing the belief that everything is happening for us instead of to us, that every step on the path is for our highest evolution and becoming, and also it's for us to bestow and teach and share with others once we step into our role as a guide or a teacher or a role model or whatever that is. It's really for service and for others. Ultimately, it is. And so our ability to step into that work often is through embracing the things that are most challenging for us. And there's so many beautiful examples of that, and that's something I can get into at another time, but I think it's really important to remember this bigger picture and really moving away from like, what can I get? And there's just a lot of stuff in the spiritual zeitgeist right now. So what we hone in on is your path, your power, what you're here to do, and then making it happen and going through this step-by-step process. So if any of this resonates, if any of this feels interesting, I would love to talk more. You can click the button or the link below. Not sure how I will set that up, but it will be clear where this is posted, and I would love to chat with you. We are going to launch our next cohort around the fall equinox, and so it will be starting at that time. The date will be confirmed closer, but that will be the week that we begin. And yeah, this is going to be a really powerful group. We already have a few people who are signed up and ready and committed, and it's going to be a really good time. Working with the fall energy is also one of my favorites. They're all my favorite, but that's why I do 4 times a year, so that we can hone in with that energy and have it guide us and support us, because it is there for us to co-create with. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If this podcast resonates, this transmission resonated with you, I would love if you could text it to a friend, if you could share it on your Instagram or your Substack, anywhere that you like to share, your Slack groups, your community, your Facebook groups, wherever you are. I would really appreciate you sharing with someone who you think would resonate from this transmission, and these words that I hope are supportive for you in this moment that you're in. Thank you so much for being here, and I will be in touch with you soon.